Okay, so my name is Răzvan Bretoiu. I'm CTO and co-founder of Linnify. And this is my colleague Darius Bogdan. He's head of engineering at Linnify. And he also is certified as professional Google Cloud architect. And he really wanted to mention that. And to have a better context of why we have this presentation, I want to explain a little bit what Linnify is doing. So Linnify is a software development company focusing on startups, especially in health, well-being, and education industries. And we are taking a startup from an idea, and we are validating that idea with them. We are building on top of that idea. We are building an MVP, and after that, we are helping the startups to actually build a real product and have the product market fit. And me and Darius work on more than 30 projects with startups, and we help them to actually build their product. And the one thing that we really saw is that there are two aspects very important for a startup, and the one is time to market. So it's really, really important for startup to market. And the other one is the flexibility. Like they need to adapt to new features and new functionality based on their feedback from the customers. So this is our agenda for today. We'll take a use case and we'll present the complexity behind the user-centric application. And what's a user-centric application? It's an app that the user is the main actor. Usually those applications are very UX oriented and UI oriented. And some example of those apps are social apps, booking system, well-being apps, everything that has a user-centric. The customer is the final user. We'll take a use case, we'll build an application, like we'll try to build an application. We'll be a booking system for our cinema. Then we'll look over the problems, over those, the proposed solution. We look over some tools that can actually help us to deliver that application faster. Then we'll look to another approach, our approach. We'll see some use cases, some showcases where we applied our approach to different startups. And in the end, we'll have a demo where we're going to show you our approach, and of course, the Q&A session. So Darius will present the use case.
Okay, let's take, for example, a use case for a booking system for a cinema app, and we have the following requirements. The users can browse the movies. The users should be able to buy movies for the tickets for the movies on the web application and on the mobile application. The administrators of the system should be able to manage the orders and the movies. The application must be secure, and we should also store the application in the cloud. Now let's see how a possible solution for this application looks like. Based on the requirements, we saw that we need to have a web application. So we are going to need a web application for the users to buy movie tickets. We also need a mobile application exactly for the same purpose to allow the users to buy tickets for our application. We need an admin dashboard where the administrators will be able to log in and manage the orders and the movies. Of course, for all of this, we will need a backend as well. So for our example, we will take a REST API backend. Because we want our application to be secure, we need to have some kind of authentication system in place. For that, we are going to use the JWT authentication. Because we already have two roles in our application, we have administrators and regular users, we are going to need a role-based access permission system in place. To persist all the data, we need some kind of database. So for that, we are going to use a relational database. To store our movies, we'll have some images, we'll have trailers. So to store that, we are going to need a file storage management system because we don't want to store the files in our relational database since it's not made for that. To make our application fast, and because we know the movies don't change that often, we are going to use an in-memory database for caching the movies for low latency. We saw in the requirements that we also want to store the application in the cloud, so we are going to need to choose a cloud provider. Here, based on the cloud provider we choose, we are going to need to learn different services for that cloud provider. For example, for the relational database, if we go with Google Cloud, we are going to choose Cloud SQL. If we are going with Amazon, we are going to choose AWS RDS. Because we want our files to be retrieved fast by the users, we are also going to add a content delivery network in front of our file storage. And of course, we want to encrypt all of our sensitive data using a secret management service from the cloud we choose. This is how a possible solution for our application would look like. Besides this, We also need to take into account CI/CD pipelines because we want our application to be continuously integrated and delivered to our environments when we do changes to our system. Besides this, we want our web developers and mobile app developers to know all the requests they can do to our backend API. So for that, we are going to write an open API documentation. Because we want to follow best practices and we want to make sure that our system is working, we need to also write unit and integration testing for our backend application at least. And on top of all of that, we want to have our infrastructure written as a code because we want to be able to create new environments very easily. So this is how a possible solution for this type of system would look like. Now, how much time do you think it takes to do the setup for this type of application? Okay, weeks. How many weeks? 2 weeks? Who thinks it's 2 weeks? Raise a hand. Okay, let's say
4 weeks. Okay.
Okay, we'll say that it takes around 2 weeks. We are going to come back to this estimation later in our presentation today.
So what Darius presented to us, we saw that some parts of the system actually, they are replicated. They can actually be, they are present in other apps as well. There's nothing fancy here, it's not innovating here. We're still being a basic cinema app. And we still need to have a full setup and full environment that will take 2 weeks. Well, that's a problem for a startup, since I mentioned that for them, time to market is critical. And we can wait 2 weeks to have a full setup. And why is that so complex? Because the technology evolved a lot in the last 10 years. And now you need different expertise in different areas. Like you need to know web development, like web frameworks, Angular, React, Vue.js. You need to know backend frameworks. You need to know infrastructure, cloud, type of infrastructure, serverless, Kubernetes. You also need DevOps. You need to know Terraform or other languages. So it's a big chance that your team will lack of expertise. And when you actually will develop the project, we'll start to make workarounds. And we don't want to make workarounds. Now, let's see some tools that actually are helping us to deliver faster. We already know the no-code tools, which are focusing on drag-and-drop approach. Those are Bubble, Webflow, Wix. There are some mobile no-code tools as well. How many of you have been used no-code tools? Okay, some of them, okay. They have some premium functionalities. You don't need to have expertise in development actually to build those tools, but they're hard to extend and they are vendor locked in. So once you choose one of those tools, you're kind of like stuck with them. The other tools are low-code tools. Those are still offering some drag-and-drop functionality. You will need a developer now that would actually integrate the low-code tools maybe with other system, and maybe will build other functionalities. The one of the most used low-code tools is Amplify for AWS. It's still where you can build actually the entire web application, but still it's not that flexible. It's vendor locked in, it's very restrictive because you are running the entire system in their sandbox. And the most, I would say, flexible tools are backend or platform as a service. They are developer oriented, and the most used tool is Firebase. How many of you use Firebase or know Firebase? Yeah. But there's still, of course, there has a lot of pros, but still their lack of flexibility, they're vendor locked in, and you don't have access to entire code. So that actually, if you're looking over those tools, we see a common problem. They are not flexible and they are vendor locked in. And that for us, for the developers, we live with an anxiety because when you choose one of those tools, it's a chance that in the beginning, we know the requirements, say, okay, we can do this with Firebase or Amplify, and we are starting working on it. And after 3 months, we need to implement another feature. And that feature will not be possible with those tools. And we live with an anxiety because we choose a tool, and then in the end, that tool maybe will not be working for us. And then in that point, we are starting to make workarounds, or actually we are starting to migrate to a completed tool from scratch. How many of you have been in that situation? Okay. So yeah, there's like a pain for the developers. So we start to look over the market to find a tool that actually can deliver the same functionality, faster as a low-code or no-code tool, but with full flexibility. We want to implement that functionality to be implemented on our tech stack, right? So because we know Node.js and Python, and Angular and React, we want to actually to have that entire functionality in our tech stack with our style guides. And we want to integrate, of course, with Google Cloud. I mean, with a cloud provider, since I say Google Cloud because we also are Google Cloud partners. But we want to integrate with our favorite Google Cloud provider. And the most important thing is that that tool should allow us to build on top of that. So we don't have any fear that in the future we cannot build any functionality because we choose that tool. In the end, that tool should generate the entire code base for all the feature, even after the initial setup, using our tech stack, using our style guides, using our entire technology stack. If you know one of those tools, let us know, because I think we waste 1 year of developing. Okay, so
that's when we started working on our own tool, which is called Linnify. And what Linnify does, it allows development teams to deliver faster using their favorite tech stack and without compromising flexibility. You will have access to all of the code, so you're in full ownership of your application, and Linnify uses a generating code approach for doing that. So let's see how Linnify works. So basically, Linnify works in 3 areas of your system. It works on the infrastructure level, where it generates the code for your infrastructure, and it also has the possibility to deploy your infrastructure to your favorite cloud. It works on the backend area, where you can select from pre-built functionalities, you can model your database entities, and configure your API endpoints. And it also comes with a highly customizable admin dashboard that you can use for your administrators of the system. Besides this, what it also has is, it has automation in place, and it will do your cloud deployment for you. It enables the CI/CD pipelines for you, and basically it will deploy your admin dashboard and your backend application to your cloud. It does all of this using a generating code approach, so you will have all of the time the entire code. So you have the flexibility to continue building on top of the code whenever you want. Okay, now let's see how easy it is to set up a project using Linnify. I am going to go through some of the steps here, but you will see all of the steps later in the demo today. When setting up the project, one of the steps is to choose from our built-in functionalities. You can select the type of API you want for your application, so it can be a REST API with an open API documentation or a GraphQL API. Linnify also comes with a built-in authentication system, email sending integration. You can also have file storage support for serving and storing assets, CDN for caching those assets to be delivered faster to your users, an in-memory caching database for low latency. You can also configure role-based access permissions at the API level, and if you're building a SaaS product, you can also select multi-tenancy. Another important step from setting up your project is choosing the tech stack. Linnify allows you to select from multiple languages and frameworks that you want to develop with, because we all know that choosing your tech stack is important, since your team needs to be very comfortable working with that. For now, Linnify allows you to select from Node.js and Python frameworks, since at Linnify we are experts working with Node.js and Python. That's why we build it on top of that. And it also allows you to select your web framework or infrastructure framework, the database, and the cache database. Linnify also integrates with your cloud provider, so you can choose your cloud provider, and with that, it will automatically deploy your infrastructure for you and always keep it up to date. You can also integrate with Git, and why you need to do this is because after you select your Git provider, you will select the repositories that you're going to use for your project, and that is the place where you're going to get the generated code by Linnify. So at any point, you can continue to build on top of that, and Linnify will stay in sync with your custom code. And you can select the CI/CD provider, the environments you will have for the application, and the deployment strategies you want to use for that. As an overview, after we go through the setup of a project, we chose pre-built functionalities, we selected our tech stack, the infrastructure type, the cloud provider, the Git provider, the environments that our application will have, and also the deployment strategy. Now, if we go back to the application we said we want to build in the beginning, and we established that it will take around 2 weeks to have the full setup, let's see where Linnify helps us with. So from the start, after we set up the project, what Datafy does, it gives you an admin dashboard from the start that is highly customizable. It gives you the REST API with the authentication in place, the role-based access permissions. It also configures your databases, your file storage. So basically all of the services that you're going to use from your cloud provider. It comes with CI/CD pipeline enabled from the start. It gives you the open API documentation. It has testing in place and also gives you the infrastructure code. So from our initial setup, which was taking around 2 weeks, now we have almost everything besides the web application and the mobile application that you need to set up, because those applications will be different based on your system, and you can focus on the UX and UI of your applications. So we got from 2 weeks to 30 minutes with a fully working production-ready environment that is working for you.
Yeah, so that entire setup, it will sit in your repositories, and it doesn't have anything related with Datafy, any dependency, anything at all. Datafy abstracts based on the technology that you choose, abstracts that and generate the right code. So basically you can use Datafy just for setup if you really want, and that's it, and then you can move it forward. But what happens if actually we want to continue work with Datafy? We want to continue develop new functionalities. So let's say we want, on our booking system now, we want to add the possibility so the user can actually place an order. So what we need to take in account, on a database layer, we need to create an order entity where we can store the actual orders. We need to configure that entity, maybe set up some relationship with the user, with the movie that the user bought. We need to write the SQL migration for the database changes based on your, if you are using an ORM, you are lucky, otherwise you need to actually write those SQL migration. On an API side, you need to create the endpoints for interacting with your order. You need to have the create endpoint, the view, the modify, the delete orders. You need to authenticate those requests, like Darius mentioned initially. You need to apply the authorized rules, like, for example, the create and view need to have view and create permission. For delete, need to have delete order permission, and we'll see that we'll have two or three roles in the system. You need to write integration and unit test, and I hope everyone is doing that. You need to implement some filter, search, and ordering capabilities, because our apps will be able to filter and search by, for example, by movie. You need to update the open API documentation, so our front-end team and mobile team can actually integrate the functionality very easily. And you will need to send an order confirmed email when the order is placed. A basic functionality, nothing fancy. On the admin dashboard, you need to have an orders page. You need to perform CRUD operation. You can filter the orders. You can create. You can update the orders. And also need to, for example, if you have two types of admins and super admins, you kind of need to hide and show some actions. So it's nothing fancy here, but we still have to work, for example, on 3 parts and all the deployment and stuff. How many days for one developer you can think you can do that? I mean, how many days you can do that? 2, 3, 4? How many? 2 days? 1 day? 4 days? 5? Okay. Okay, let's see how easily we can do that with Datafy. So Datafy has the concept of branching, as we are having on Git branching. So you can actually create a branch from Datafy Web Builder, and that branch will represent the state of your system. It will handle all the changes that you are doing. And what I mean by changes, for example, you are going on a database modeling part, and you can actually see all the entities into your system. You can configure them. You can add properties, add relationship with them. So you can configure all the entities, how the database will look like. Then you can go on a API configuration. You can create endpoints. You can attach authentication system. You can attach permission. You can configure how the request body will look like, what validations need to be applied, how the response will look like. So you can configure the endpoints. And after that, after you finish with the changes, you can actually see all the changes done into the Datafy branch. And in that moment, you can actually see those changes, and you can actually generate the code. When you generate the code, the Datafy will analyze all the changes, and based on your own tech stack, and we'll see what code is generated, you will generate the code, and you will push the code into your Git repositories. So let's see some examples. For example, this is the generated code for a text tag using Node.js with Koa, Prisma, and Postgres. So this is a Prisma schema. It's an order entity. It has a user, a movie, an amount. It's just a Prisma schema. Then on the business logic side, it's actually generate the create order functionality. We see that it generated the send email functionality when we're gonna send an email for when the order is created. We see that the code is very visible. It's nothing fancy. It's a code that I think we see this type of code in every application. And on the REST API level, we see that we added Datafy created a new route for you. It's called orders, and here we are displaying just the create order endpoint. It has authentication guard in place. It has the authorization in place with create order permission, and also it's validate the request. So all those stuff are generated by Datafy and pushed into your code. But what happens, for example, after we done this thing, we want, for example, to add new functionality. For example, we want to integrate a new payment provider. And in order to integrate that payment provider, we want to integrate a local payment provider since it has a better fees, let's say. And we cannot implement Stripe, which is easily. So what we can do, we actually can use our favorite idea. Since the code is available on our Git branch, just pull the branch, do your work. It's nothing related with Datafy. Install whatever dependencies you like. It's Node.js, it's Koa, or whatever framework you selected. Do your work there, and then just push the code, as you are usually doing. In that moment, Datafy will actually detect the changes that you push. It will scan the changes, and will automatically upgrade the Datafy remote state. What that means, for example, if you added a new entity, a new model, a new route, Datafy will analyze that and will automatically create that route entity or logic into your Datafy builder. And that means you always be in sync. So Datafy will not overwrite when you generate code, your manual code, because you analyze that. And also when you push the manual code, Datafy will know and will update the state. So we always be in sync with what you are doing. This is how easily you can implement functionalities with Datafy. Now let's see some use cases that we already built. Like I said, this is a product that we worked in the last year, and we also tested this product using Linnify as our development company. And we have 7 products that we use Datafy. All are production or are live. For example, here this is the dashboard that's automatically generated by Datafy. It's Angular. It's nothing fancy. It doesn't have anything related with Datafy. It's just Angular, and it was headless CMS, I think. Yeah, they're selling tickets online for first aid. For example, here we use for a travel agency is I think B2B marketplace, and we have other 5 platforms that we build with Datafy. In average, the time was reduced by 50%, and that was huge for us because one developer that has some backend knowledge and knows, okay, what's an API, knows a little Node or Python, they actually use Datafy in order to generate the entire system. And they build some functionalities on top of Datafy. And in the end, the time was reduced by 50%, and instead of having 2 or 3 developers, we actually have just 1 developer. Now, let's see a demo how we can set up actually a project with Datafy. Yeah, I will be Darius co-pilot today.
Okay, so let's start to set up a project with Datafy. First thing that we need to do is go to datafy.com. And from here, we can look over the website if you want, and then click on the Create Project button.
We'll have a QR code in the end when you can scan it and find the website.
After we get to Datafy application, we can log in with Google, for example. And we are taken to the Datafy application. Here, we already have a project that we created beforehand, but for this demo, we are going to create a new project. The first step after we want to set up a project is to give some general information about our project. So for example, we are building a cinema application, we put a description, and then we have a choice that we can make. If we want to deploy the infrastructure on our cloud or not. If we select yes here, then afterwards you will need to connect with your cloud provider and give access to Datafy to your cloud. If you select no, you can gather generated code and then you can manually deploy your application if you want to. For now, we are going to select the no option here. We can also upload the logo, so we have our beautiful cinema logo here, and we can go to the next page. Here we can select from pre-built functionalities. Like we said, for our cinema app, we are going to go with the REST API, so we select REST API here. We see that Datafy comes with authentication system in place, so we by default have the sign up with email and password, and also the reset password functionality. We can then select our sending email provider. We have SendGrid selected, so we are going to add our API key here and an email address. We have the possibility to select if you want to cache the data. Like we said, for our cinema app, we are going to use Redis for caching the data, so we want to enable that. We have the file storage selected by default, so we automatically can upload files into our system. And we have some more functionalities here that are currently available for our alpha program. We can select the database type, which can be relational or non-relational. If we want to use the CDN, if we want to enable the roles-based access permissions, and the multi-tenancy. After we are done with the pre-built functionalities, we can go to the next step. And here we can select our tech stack. For the main database, we are going to choose Postgres. For the cache database, since we enable the caching, we are going to select Redis here. We can select from Python and Backend programming languages. We are going to go with Koa. And for the admin dashboard, we have selected Angular and Terraform for the infrastructure code. Afterwards, we can go to the next step, which is selecting our infrastructure type. So basically, we have two types of infrastructures. We know that now there are more and more services appearing for serverless containers. If you know, for Google Cloud, for example, we have Cloud Run, Cloud Functions, a lot of services. AWS has Lambdas, has Elastic Container Service. So we can also see here some advantages of using that, because if you don't have DevOps experience, it's really easy for you and it's developer-oriented, and it also scales down to 0. So we can go with the serverless containers approach. Now we get to the cloud step where we can select our cloud provider. Since we selected that we don't want Datafy to deploy on our cloud, we don't have to do anything here, just select the provider. If we go back to the first step and select that we want Datafy to deploy our code, and then go back to the cloud step, we can select the region where we want to deploy the code. And here we see some regions available. For example, let's go with Frankfurt. And we can connect our Google Cloud account. So if we click on Connect with Google, we can connect to Google. It gives access to your Google Cloud Platform account, and then you can select the project. At the bottom, we can see the services that Datafy is going to deploy for you. Because we selected the serverless approach, it's going to create a Cloud Run instance for your backend, it's going to spawn a Cloud SQL instance for your main database, it's going to use memory store for Redis, cloud storage for storing the files, secret manager for storing all the secrets encrypted in the cloud, and Firebase hosting for our admin dashboard. Now let's go back to the first step and disable the deploy, because when we want to deploy our system, to have all the infrastructure, it takes around 30 minutes. We don't have that much for this demo, so we are going to go with the no deployment approach. And you can click on next. Now we can select our Git provider. Let's go with Bitbucket. We can connect our Bitbucket account. So in this step, what we do, we are giving Datafy access to our Bitbucket so it can push the generated code to our repositories. And we select our workspace when we want to do that. And then we need to connect our repositories. So we have to connect the backend repository. Then we can select the front-end repository for the admin dashboard and the infrastructure repository. So after we do this, on these repositories, Datafy is going to push the generated code. If we go on next, we have the environment setup, where by default we have one environment, the production environment, and also the possibility to add new environments. Let's go on to the next one. Here on the deployment step, you can select your deployment strategy. For example, when we push to master, we want our code to be deployed on the production environment, and we can also add other pipelines here. Let's go on to the next step. And we can select the CI/CD provider we want to use. Since we already selected Bitbucket, the easiest choice is to go with Bitbucket pipelines. And here we need to make sure that we have Bitbucket pipelines enabled for our Bitbucket plan. Otherwise, it won't enable them, but it will still work. So if we go on the overview, here we can see an overview of everything that Datafy does for us. So basically, we configured that we want Terraform for the infrastructure, so it's going to generate Terraform code. If we select the deploy on the first step, it will automatically deploy that infrastructure to Google Cloud, and there we can see how the infrastructure looks like. So we have Cloud Run, which is for the backend. It's going to connect to a Cloud SQL database with a Postgres database. It will connect to the memory store with Redis. We also have the file storage enabled with cloud storage, and it will use Secret Manager. For the Angular part, we can see that, and for the Koha part, we can see that it will enable Bitbucket pipelines for our CI/CD, and it will automatically deploy the changes to Cloud Run and on Firebase hosting. So if we create a project, after we create the project, we are taken to the dashboard, and here we can see some general information about the project, and on the top we can see the project overview. So basically what it's doing now is generating our infrastructure code. Afterwards, it will generate the backend code and the web admin code, and it will push to our repositories. If we select the deploy option, that step, like the deployment status, will take about 30 minutes because it also starts all the infrastructure for you on your cloud. So that's why we are going for this one without the deployment, but we will show you how that looks afterwards. And now, after it's finished, we can go on we can click there on the backend repository, the admin repository, and the infrastructure repository, and we can see that the code was pushed 21 seconds ago by Datafy here. This is the backend application. If you scroll down a bit, we can see also the README, so it's really easy to start the project. It's with Koha and Prisma, and we can also go on the admin application and the infrastructure one, so that you can see them. Here is a project that was built with Angular, because we selected Angular, and we are going to clone these repositories in a moment so that you can also see the code, and also the infrastructure one. Before we clone the repositories, let's go back to the application and go on the previous created project. If you go back on the projects list. So we created beforehand the bookstore application, and if we click on that application, we are going to be taken to the dashboard here. If we go on the logs part in the left, we are going to see all the logs that Datafy wrote for us. So for example, we can see that it created the database because, like I said, this project was also deployed. It created the Terraform production workspace, it planned the deployment, and also started the deployment. If we go on the admin application, Razvan, we can go on the admin dashboard. We have a link there. This is how the admin looks like, and we can log into the application. So this is how the generated admin dashboard by Datafy looks like. We automatically have dashboard in place with the users page, and we have all the CRUD functionalities enabled from the start. So if we click on add data, we can see the create new user form, and if we go back, we can also see that we have filters by default. It's a basic admin dashboard, basically. Now, if we go back to the Datafy application, we can also look at the OpenAPI documentation that it has for the backend that it generated. So here we can automatically see that all the requests from our application are documented. So if you go on the login endpoint, for example, and we try to execute it, we can see that we got a 401 error because the account doesn't exist. Now let's clone the repository with the code that it generated. For example, the backend application. And you can also clone the admin one. Now, if we go back to Bitbucket and read the README for the backend application, so that we need to see what we have to do for starting it. Can you? Yeah. Okay. So here we can see that we need to clone the repository, install the dependencies, and copy the environment examples for the application. You can copy those commands, yeah. And let's start with installing the dependencies. Can you switch to Node 16? Because I think in the prerequisites, yeah. Yeah, in the README, it said that we need to have Node above, yeah, Node version bigger than 16. So after the dependencies are installed, we can copy the environment files. And let's check the README. We need to also start Docker. Yeah, it's not started. Until Docker starts, we can go to the admin repository and start that project. Until the dependencies are installed, you can go on WebStorm so we can see the code. Yeah. If you right click and then reload from disk. So we have here the repositories that Datafy created for us. If we go, let's go on the file because I don't think we can zoom on the left part. So if you go for the backend, for example, in source authentication, and we go on the router, and we zoom here, we can see how the generated code looks like for the authentication. It's a three-layer architecture, so we have controllers, services, and repositories. We can also see that the documentation is written, so if you go on the top on the backend repositories and enter in the documentation, from there. Yeah, we can see that we have an open API documentation here, so let's open a file. So this is how the open API specification for our backend looks like. We can go back in the terminal and see if the dependencies were installed. Yeah, I think the internet is not working that good here. We can go back on the code so that we can also show some other files. For example, let's go on the users and we go in the users controller. This is how a controller looks like generated by Datafy. So we have basic RAD functionality here for the users. But you will be able to see all of this code if you do the setup as well. And we can see that we also have tests. So if we go on the test part, on the authentication, for example, and open the authentication controller or services. Yeah, we can see that. Can you zoom in a bit? Yeah, so Datafy also generated tests for us. Let's go back on Bitbucket, because for our previous product, the bookstore, if we go on the Bitbucket pipelines, not on the cinema, on the bookstore one, and if we go on the backend and on the pipelines, we can see that Datafy also enabled the pipelines for us. So if we go on the first one, which was started by Datafy, we can see that it built the application and then it deployed it to Google Cloud. And also if we go on the admin repository, on the pipelines, we can see here that the pipelines ran as well and the application was deployed on Firebase. Can we go back to the terminal to see if the dependencies were installed? Yeah, we can go back to the backend one and start Docker. So Docker system prone. Yeah, I think I had some containers left, so let's. Yeah. In the meantime, you can start the admin application on the right. And if you do an npm start, you need to change the node version. Okay, while the application is running, we can go on localhost 8000 to see that the backend started. It started, but it's not found because we don't have an endpoint for that. And on the documentation, it's generated only when you deploy the application. So if you go on the terminal, let's see if you can go on the admin application. I think I was logged in from the previous one, but basically the admin application is connected to the backend one, and if we go log in with admin at admin.com, and the password is password with, yeah, it's in the README. If you go on the README, you will see the password. A very strong password, as we can see. And yeah, that's how easy it is to do a setup with Datafy. If you want to also have access to the code generation for adding on top of it, like modeling your databases and also the API configuration, you can join our alpha program. If you go on the presentation slide, there is a QR code there, so you will have access to everything that was presented. And yeah, that's about it with the demo. So if there are questions, we can take questions.
Yeah, so,
what's the performance like of the API itself? So, for example, in Django, are you using Django ORM with Swagger? Okay, so it's basically the Django API default performance. Okay, so is your solution one of the faster ones in the market, or not necessarily? How have you done a performance test compared to other either solutions like yours or just APIs in general?
so no, we didn't. We didn't do that because Datafy it's working on a base framework. So if Django, you all know Django, it's coming with full batteries and has some low performance. Datafy is not doing anything fancy. So it's still your job as a developer to actually, if you really want to write performance code on top of that, to actually to improve that. So we are not doing anything. We are just generating the parts that are most repetitive parts of the system. And usually in the application, there are 40% of the tasks, are repetitive tasks, and we saw them in other systems. And for those one Datafy is using, we are not taking developer job or something. No, the developers still need to focus on writing actually performance code.
Thank you. I think you've done an amazing job. It's a very interesting product. So I have a couple of questions. Maybe it's okay if I ask a couple of them. So what happens when you update the technology behind Datafy? Does it? I mean, as a customers of the technology, do you benefit from updates to the product itself, so to Datafy itself? For example, you add new integrations, or you add an optimized way of generating code, or
Yeah, so that's why right now the Datafy is in alpha, but that's why you can use Datafy only for setup. But if you are paying customer, you will benefit for that. So
okay, nice.
we'll support some of the technologies. We'll not do everything. Like, for example, not do Java. Sorry, Java developers. But we'll support some of the technologies and some of the best frameworks, and we'll keep up to date with them.
Okay.
Like if they're releasing a new version, we of course release a new version of that setup. And then
yeah,
we'll
that was the
integrate it.
idea. So you.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll do that.
Okay, nice. And then how much does it cost? I mean, it's definitely you put a lot of work into this, and I would expect that there's a cost that you.
Right now it's free, so everyone can try this free. After we finish with alpha program, because right now we are getting feedback, and that's why if you want to join, because on alpha program you can do the development flow what I show you with all the stuff, but you still need some guidance from our team, from me and Darius. But after that you will pay. It will be like subscription based per month. It will be like $5 or $10 per month per developer, because the developers will be actually jump on the data file. They will have branches there, and they will let data file. But you can use data file till one point. If you don't want to use it anymore, it's fine. You can stop your subscription.
Okay, thank you. And the last question is, so you said that compared to creating this whole stack from zero, it's much more efficient. So the whole stack takes like 3 weeks. That you can do it in 30 minutes. How does it compare to just using Firebase, for example? I mean, it's okay. I understand that there's a developer lock-in and stuff, but you can theoretically use that. And I mean, my question is, so I'm not highly technical. My question would be, like, if for me or if the team that I'm working on doesn't really have a problem being vendor locked in with Firebase, how does it compare what you've done with that?
I think that's totally fine. We are not. I think Firebase is a big player, and it still has its own advantage that we don't have, of course. And for example, if you are building an application and you know very well the requirements, and you are sure that Firebase is a good fit for you, because Firebase, of course, has a lot of pros. Yeah. You can still use Firebase. I mean, it's because in the end, Firebase takes all the hassle of having the infrastructure managed, because they are managing the stuff for you. But for example, Firebase also has some limitations. So if you are building an application, but you know that application actually will be evolved, there's a chance that your development team needs at some point in time to do workarounds. I know, for example, on Firestore, what we saw is that you cannot search. You cannot have full text search, right? So you need to do a workaround. You need to integrate other service. So you start doing workarounds in order to apply that. But again, it depends on the use case. So if the use case is very known, totally go with Firebase, go with Amplify, go with the tools that actually can deliver you to be from point A to point B very quickly. But if the scope can be changed in the future, there might be a problem.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, very good job. Thank you for the presentation.
So that means that basically Datify as a, let's say, product is really good for proof of concept, or like having an initial deployment of your idea. And then you say you would charge per developer subscription model. But then the question is, wouldn't it better for you to have an initial cost as well? Because after people come to Datify and they do generate, well, let's say most of the infrastructure code they'll ever need, why would they keep the subscription? Obviously, you would need to integrate something like our friend asked, continuous updates regarding the technology and everything like that. But I think it could also be monetized as a one-time thing, right? Like a deployment option. So
yeah, you're right. I think you cut me here because right now we are not 100% know how we modernize that. We know about subscription. We thought about the setup part. We want to build we don't want to be a tool that actually just generate. That's why we build on top of that. Yeah, we want to be more. We want to be Datify to be actually a developer in your team that actually do the repetitive tasks that you don't want to do it. You know. But yeah, we are thinking about different monetizations part. We even, for example, some of the parts of the Datify will be open source. So we want to try the community to use some parts of the system that we're gonna maintain. They can use those, for example, libraries we can use on other projects, not on Datify only. But yeah, right now, I know about subscription, but I'm not 100% sure that we're gonna charge for setup as well.
yeah, so all I wanted to say at the end is the product looks really good. I think it's a useful solution. And yeah, you obviously need to think about this cost. And yeah, that's it. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, then I think that's it. We finished, right?